berms that we put in this area, part of our Rural Stormwater Management. So what we're trying to do is hold the water back on the field. So the key is in the headwaters to hold the water back as long as we can, help filter it out so we can improve water quality. Funding, so it's kind of unique. It's always been done in the urban areas, and this is one of the first options that we're doing it in the rural landscape. So what happens originally in the Garvey Glen, when we get these heavy rainfall events, we get a peak flow that comes up very quickly, and that's where we get the erosion. And you'll see more of that as we move downstream. So with Rural Stormwater Management, what we're trying to do is reduce that peak flow and extend the duration so we don't have the erosion. So in the headwaters where we are now, we probably want to hold that water back as long as we can. And with these berms, we can hold them 12 to 24 hours before releasing it, and then we don't have any crop damage. So up in this area, what we did, there's a broad-based berm that's in behind us. It's an erosion control berm that the farmer can crop right over. And the idea of these berms, there's 5 of them in here, is to hold the water back. So when we have those heavy downpour events, we store the water back in behind the berms. And then there's French drains that we put in there. So the water's held back and the French drains filter the water out. So we want to hold the water on the landscape and release it slowly back into the drains before it reaches the lake. And then as we move further down into the watershed, then we want to get rid of that water quickly so we don't have that peak flow. So that's part of the Rural Stormwater Management modeling that we're doing, and we're going to learn a lot more from that. So we're in the headwaters of the Garvey Glen watershed here, and we're seeing a lot of challenges in the watershed. Over the last few years, we're seeing a lot more land that's being worked up and in the watershed, so we're losing a lot of the fence rows have been removed up here. There was a lot of small farms up in this area with a lot of pasture, and now there's very little pasture. There's really 3 or 4 big ownerships up here now, so the fence rows are being removed. We're losing a lot of the water courses have been closed in, a lot of the buffering along the water courses, so we're losing a lot of that resiliency that used to be on the landscape. And the other challenge we're having is the climate change has had a big impact. I know we started talking about that maybe 7 years ago, and I've been with the authority since back in the 80s, and we usually had 1 flood event a year, which was usually in the spring. And once we got past that, you know, it wasn't a big issue. But nowadays we're seeing it almost once or twice a month, these heavy downpour, intense rains. And so it's being a real challenge because we're losing all the resiliency on the landscape. And then with those heavy downpours, we're having a lot of erosion. So up in this area, this is our basin number 1 that's in behind us here. So the Garvey Glen, there's about 4,000 acres from here to the water, or to the lake. And it's about 17 square miles that we have here. And it's worked really well. We had 3 major events over the winter where all these berms were full to capacity. You can see 1 berm here, and then there's a series of 2 other ones in behind it. And the 1 berm's about 5 feet tall. So those berms are all full to capacity twice over the winter, and so was the one further upstream. So they did work very well. They held that water back and did prevent some of the erosion downstream. So that one's been completed. Our next phase will be the watershed in behind you, and it's a little bigger watershed. It goes over to the bush far to the north there, and there's a series of 11 berms that will go in there, 11 erosion control berms. And we have to include some grass waterways too, because we can't handle all the water that's coming out of that watershed. And when we started this project 2 years ago, it actually washed the road out downstream, and they put a new culvert in there. So again, it shows the importance of that rural stormwater management.
Yeah, now does the water then just percolate through the berms, or do you have a way of actually opening them up?
Yeah, these ones, you can see the orange pipe back there is called a Hickenbottom. So what happens, the water is held back and it gets released into the Hickenbottom. That's the normal way we do it. And on these ones was the first time where we put what we call a French drain. So we dug down, put a tile down in the bottom, filled it up with drainage stone, and then put filter cloth, thinking that will filter the water a little bit better too. So it's kind of innovative, first time we've done it on these ones, and it did work very well too. So we want to monitor that and see if that helps improve it. So there is a tile underneath that. The Hickenbottom drains it away within 12 hours so that, you know, the crops don't get any damage and the farmer's not losing any land. Right now we're working with the new owner to see if we can dump that tile water into a wetland and filter it even more. So we're still hoping to do that.
Jeff, are these broad-based berms, are they engineered or are they just built by a skilled contractor?
Yeah, that's, we do a lot of erosion control berms, and we have qualified contractors that have taken the OMAFRA course to design them properly. And these ones, I was involved in some of the design, and then we worked with Stantec to do it, because that's the other challenge is properly designing these, getting proper tender packages out, going through the whole process, and that's where we're finding it very expensive. So the coordination to get this all designed, once you get it designed, then usually you can find the funding to put it in place. So it's difficult to find the funding to actually get the coordination part of it done, which is the key, because we have to have that first.
But you actually have to survey the elevations to get the berm properly located.
Yeah, that whole watershed's been surveyed. This has all been surveyed. We just recently went back in to resurvey the berms after construction. And now we can determine how much water they're holding and when they fill up with sediment, because that's the other important part, is to make sure they're maintained for the future. So we have rods in there that have measurements so we know how much sediment we're catching. And we do have funding under the soil health project too that we're looking at the cropping and tillage. Cropping and tillage should always be your first thing. You know, what can you do with cropping and tillage to reduce your erosion? Because once you get into this infrastructure, it gets a lot more expensive. So the sweep plans we do, we look at, you know, what can we do with the cropping and tillage, and then from there, you know, what kind of structures, because even the cropping and tillage reduces what the size of those berms need to be. So,
Jeff, do you think tillage practice will has the potential to extend the life of the French drains before they need maintenance?
yeah, yeah, because the more, you know, if it's just conventional cropping and we still have that erosion happening, then, you know, the sediment will fill in there. And the berms are supposed to be designed the way that you shouldn't get any runs from that point downstream if they're doing the job. But again, the more you can incorporate conservation tillage in that, then that helps reduce any of that erosion in between the berms. And you know, with some of these Hickenbottoms and that too, we're hoping that maybe we can use some of the tile drains with control boxes on them to keep the you know, the nutrients and the water table up. We've done some of that at Murray and Wilma Scott's property too, so we want to experiment a bit with that too.
What sort of tillage practices would reduce?
Yeah, actually the Crafts, that was him that just went by, they're into more no-till up through here, so you can see the no-till end of the field there. So trying to reduce your tillage and leaving as much residue on the surface as possible. You want to have at least 30% residue. And that's what we're looking at, is the cropping and tillage part of it too, putting windbreaks in for the winter and trying to get more of this land in cover crops too. So it's that whole big push of proper cropping and tillage and management, and then, you know, what we can do with this infrastructure.